Looks of like.
Well, we are back. I don't know if you want to say in session, but we are back in process of this meeting. And good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here with all of you who are joining us in person or virtually for the Local Government Commission's second annual symposium. I'm State Senator Chris Dush. I represent the 25th District. That composes McKean, Potter, Tioga, Elk, Cameron, Clinton, Jefferson, and part of Clearfield County. Soon to change a little bit, but I have 177 municipal governments, and that's a lot of them. And so this is a very important opportunity for me to learn, which is why I'm here personally. And it's also a pleasure, my pleasure, to be chair of the local government committee this year, or this session. In this role, I've worked closely with the local government commission, and I'm very grateful for all the support, and we work very hard to make sure we get these non-controversial bills through both the House and Senate. It's a bipartisan, bicameral committee, or commission, as Senator Hutchinson said earlier. And we do work well together. I thank the commission staff for the great work putting together the program today. I've been very taken by the panels. And this panel, the importance of work-life balance in recruitment and retention of public employees. This panel will focus on strategies to improve public sector recruitment and retention efforts by discussing the importance of work-life balance to the changing labor market. I know both government and business are experiencing significant problems in this area. Joining us for this panel from Shippensburg University are Drs. Sara Grove, the chair of the Political Science Department and the interim chair of the Criminal Justice Department, Michael Moltz. Please, if I get these names incorrectly, I apologize. Assistant Professor of Political Science, and Michael Greenberg, Associate Professor of Political Science and the Faculty Liaison to the Career Mentoring and Professional Development Center at Shippensburg University. With them are Lisa Schaefer, the Executive Director of the County Commissioners Association of Pennsylvania, and Tammy Shearer, the Cumberland County Recorder of Deeds and President of the Pennsylvania State Association of Elected County Officials. Thank you all for being with us here today. And we'll start basically in the order in which I'd brought people up. So Sara, if you would please, a little introduction about yourself and go ahead.
Well, thank you for the invitation. And I really want to acknowledge the work of our alum, Julia Fry, who has been a great supporter for the Local Government Commission also. So thank you for the invitation. I am the chairperson of the Political Science Department and the interim chairperson of Criminal Justice. I have been at Shippensburg for 31 years, and along the way, I've had many interns here at the Capitol who have worked for both sides of the aisle and doing some really good work in public policy and in local government. I also have had a long-standing relationship with the Center for Rural Pennsylvania, who I've worked on a number of projects with. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I am really the moderator of this panel, so I don't know if we're ready for us to start, or would you like me to introduce everyone before we
lead on?
All right, we'll lead on. I'll introduce my colleagues as we go through. So as our program says, we're going to talk about the recruitment and retention of public employees. And the senator just kind of went through our abstract. And we're going to talk a little bit today about why we need to be more innovative in the public sector, especially when we talk about employees and start to think about this idea of work-life balance. Because we have learned from the pandemic that we oftentimes have to pivot, and we have to think about new ways of engaging our employees and engaging with our constituents. And so our purpose today is to talk a little bit about it from an academic perspective, and also to hear from two individuals who actually have individuals who were in their offices full-time before the pandemic and now have had to pivot and transition. And it's made their lives better, and it's made more opportunities also for constituents. And then the last person who's going to talk is my colleague, Michael Greenberg. And while Michael is a political science professor, Michael has an extensive background in the area of technology. And so he's going to talk about the ideas of technology as a way to help us make these transitions. We have our presentation timed so that we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. I will be time on task, and so I'm going to give each person basically roughly about 10 minutes to talk, and then that should give us plenty of time to have your questions and stay on track for the 11:30 presentation. So as we go through this, this is the order of what we're going to talk, the order we're going to have here. And Dr. Moltz is going to begin, and I'm going to ask him to introduce himself while I transition to his slide.
Thank you, Dr. Grove. I'm Mike Moltz, Associate Professor of Political Science at Shippensburg University. I teach primarily in the Master's in Public Administration program. And I'm thrilled to be here today to talk about work-life balance, because this is actually my primary research area within public personnel management. So I'll give you kind of the academic research background to introduce the topic, and then I'll turn over to the actual experts who do this for a living. So when we're thinking about work-life balance within the academic research realm, we kind of come across a few definitions of it and how we kind of approach work-life balance. And really it comes down to a balance between your work commitments and your private life commitments. And in the world of academia, we often like to quantify things and figure out how we're going to measure it. And how do we measure these commitments? Well, we do so mostly in our research through time commitments. So it's really a balance between the amount of time you're spending in your work commitments and the amount of time you're spending in your private life commitments. But that doesn't really capture the full picture of what work-life balance is. We all experience this. In my former life, I was a consultant, and we used to joke about the work-work balance, because there was no life part to that. But it's not just a time commitment issue, right? It's also a flexibility issue. I kind of think of this more as owning your career and your private life. You're having ownership over both aspects of that, having ownership over your private and your career. And so we can consider this also in terms of the flexibility to create your own schedule, leisure time, time with friends and family, time and hobbies and other activities, right? As the private life side of the work-life balance equation. And when we're thinking about just why work-life balance matters, to me, it really comes down to the recruitment and retention aspect to retaining or attracting and retaining quality public servants. It's no surprise that local, state, federal, across the globe, we're facing a challenge in attracting and recruiting and retaining quality public servants, especially in this era of employment struggles, where I'm sure many of us here, especially hiring managers, are experiencing many challenges in that realm to attract enough applicants in their applicant pools. And so what we see in the research is that a quality work-life balance, employees who say that or perceive that they have a better work-life balance, that's going to help attract prospective employees, jobs that have good work-life balance, that really we're looking for a match between what the employee prefers, or the prospective employee, what they prefer, and what their work environment offers. And in this day and age, especially post-COVID, many employees, they prefer that balance, that flexibility in their work arrangements. And if we as employers can provide that, then we open up more opportunities to attract more qualified applicants to our positions. And so it really comes down to if we have more work-life balance, then we're more likely to retain the employees. The employees are less likely to look for another job. And yes, we retain the institutional knowledge if we retain our employees. We retain those relationships at work, but there's also a dollars and cents issue there as well, right? If we retain our employees, we have lower turnover rates. That translates into direct reduced costs for personnel. That's a very expensive process for the attraction and recruitment of new employees. But beyond that aspect of work-life balance, perhaps one of the most significant correlations, if you will, between work-life balance and other job characteristics is the aspect of job satisfaction. The strongest relationship we see throughout most of the research is that employees who say they have a good work-life balance, who have control over their careers, who have control over their schedules, they are more satisfied at work. And that job satisfaction aspect to this equation can't be understated, because job satisfaction is tied into so many other positive aspects on the job. We're thinking about things like employee performance, mental health of the employees, and all this then translates into positive outcomes for the organization, where we have better organizational outcomes, we have better outcomes for public service delivery. So it all ties in together. And so if we're going to kind of follow this chain of events, right, if we can create a good work-life balance for our employees, then we can increase employee performance and thereby see rewards in terms of increased organizational outcomes and public service delivery. And I'll just finish up by introducing the topic of work-life balance here by saying it's not just enough to say, how does work-life balance contribute to these other things like job satisfaction and turnover and whatnot, but what's contributing to work-life balance? That's another thing we need to consider. And so those significant contributors to work-life balance, those factors that help increase the work-life balance for our employees, would be things like flexible work arrangements, whether that's the modality of how the employee is working, splitting that up between a hybrid work environment, their location, setting their schedules, and so forth. And then allowing employees more flexibility to work in private life activities, to have greater control over their schedules. And then we also see in the research the creation of family-friendly and inclusive work policies also contributes to greater work-life balance for employees. So with that, I thank you for allowing me to introduce this topic, and then I'll turn it over to Tammy.
Thank you. My name is Tammy Shearer. I am in my 9th year as Cumberland County Recorder of Deeds. I am finishing my 2nd year as president of the Pennsylvania State Pennsylvania State Association of Elected County Officials, SACO we call it. And with SACO, we represent all of the countywide row officer associations, and including CCAP, our County Commissioners Association. And we are very fortunate and blessed to have the Local Government Commission work very closely with us. We work on legislation and things that affect our county row offices. So that has been a fantastic experience for me. I'm happy to be here again for the 2nd year to be included in this discussion. And I had reached out to David with an idea very close to the time you were coordinating all of this, because in my office over COVID, wow, as a county, as a boss, everything was out the window, step back, reevaluate. My husband and I also own a small business, so it's been very interesting to see how he handled things in the private sector with a small office as well. I have 4 full-time employees, 1 part-time person in addition to myself, and I am actually the newest member to the county government in my office. I've had a lot of folks I inherited from my predecessor, and I have a fantastic staff, and very, very fortunate for that, especially over the COVID time. So over COVID, for 5 weeks, our county paid employees to stay home. That didn't mean work still had to get done. We had to figure out how to do that. So my first deputy and I ran the office for those 5 weeks ourselves, and using our laptops from home. Okay, what's this VPN stuff? Let's start to figure this out. Can we do it? And we realized, oh, we can do it. Going into COVID in my office, thanks to e-recording, we were at 65% e-recording. So 65% of our documents were already coming in electronically. That's a great start. But you still have to go to the office and get the mail. You have to handle phone calls. There's a lot of things you have to do. So after you get through those 5 weeks of COVID, then the county said, we really want you to consider furloughing your employees for a little bit longer. And okay, how are we going to do this? Well, my first deputy and I actually ran our office for about 10 weeks at that time, the 2 of us. And we said, we will never, ever, ever do that again. So we were very grateful at that time to get county laptops that had Zoom on them, that had a lot of other wonderful tools. And it took us about 2 years to refine our new office policy and then the way we operate. And still to this day, I have all my staff, they have laptops and they work remotely 2 to 3 days a week. They work in the office 2 to 3 days a week. So the office is open. We are working. We've actually shortened our hours by a half an hour because no one goes out for an hour-long lunch anymore. Staff used to have a whole hour. No one does. So they said, if we just take a half an hour lunch, can we leave at 4 o'clock? Well, the last half an hour, they're kind of looking at the clock, ready to run out the door. So I'd rather maximize my time in the middle of the day when the work is there. But we had to find our balance. And do we have people work from home for a whole week? Do they, not do that? How do we work and get this office morale situation handled too, so they get to see each other, that we just don't have teams of people working together. And I saw last week or 2 weeks ago, I think it was CBS Sunday Morning, a program talking about this. And they had a CEO who said, everyone's coming back. We're going back to the way it was. We're bringing everyone back. And then they had someone else who said, nope, we're all remote. Everyone's working from home forever. Then they had a hybrid person like I am. And we're government office. And I never, ever thought being a public office, you could work from home. Well, over COVID, I was hoping I could get my e-recording numbers up to 70, 75%. We are now just shy of 89% e-recording still to this day. So I had to dig my heels in a little bit with some of my attorneys and my title companies. And now they understand, why do I want to drive to Carlisle, fight for parking, go through security to record a deed? And so we still have some folks, if they're coming into the courthouse, they want to do that, but they're now appreciating it. And we are requesting appointments. We're not requiring, we're not demanding, but we're requesting appointments to help with a limited staff, to help with this new workflow. And it does help us keep a flow in the office so that staff, okay, we know these appointments are coming in. They can work recordings, indexing, verifying around what is happening. My thought, well before COVID, when I got elected, was it's a responsibility of elected officials and government leaders to keep an open mind, okay? And it is our job, we are tasked with forward motion. That when I hear CEOs say, we're going back to the way it was, there is no going back. It just isn't. We have wonderful technology available to us. I reached out to my IT department and he said, most departments now, we're replacing laptops, the computers with laptops. More and more people are working from home. And it provides an opportunity. And we've also expanded our cloud-based services. So when you're working at home, you can share documents. And through our software, Landex is our software we use for our land record system. And we can have people work remotely in shared documents. You can't be in the same document at the same time, but you can see what's happening in real time. And we have one of my employees, she is kind of responsible for most of the phone calls that come in, and she sits on her laptop through Jabber and she can return phone calls. So I'd say every week about 65% of the phone calls that come into my office are being answered remotely. And she loves it because there are less distractions. You don't have people coming in, you don't have the traffic, you're sitting at home in front of your computer, you have access to everything that you would at the courthouse. You can return calls with less commotion. And we have increased our documents. 2019, the number of documents we've recorded in 2019 versus 2021, we recorded 19,000 documents more than we did in 2021 than we did in 2019. We would not have been able to keep up with that if we didn't have the efficiency of working at home. But as what Mike was saying too, over COVID, the other thing that happened is we've all changed our mindset, including me. I need a work-life balance. I really do. But we have, in my office, the demographic, we're all maybe in our 50s. That's the age range. So you're dealing with some grandparents. We have a few with kids in high school. Me, you're dealing with aging parents and deaths in the family. And it presents, a new pressure in your world, a new dynamic. And we need to be flexible to that. Life happens, and we need to accommodate those changes. So with my staff now even working remotely, we've changed the office hours. We found out we start earlier. You're working remotely, you're done earlier. You're done between 3 and 3:30 in the day. That's huge if you have personal obligations. We have the ability to work remotely too. You have a sick parent. Again, being flexible, you're working remotely that week. Stay with your sick parent, work remotely, work when you need to handle something, log out, log back in when you can, make up the time or take the time. If you have the time to use, take up the time. That we have to be conscious of life and giving people that work-life balance. And I'll just say, and I'm very, very blessed again with the staff that I have. I've hired one employee in 2015, my first deputy, because the prior deputy had retired. That has been all I've had to hire in my office. And again, I think some of that, besides the fact I'm a fantastic boss, is that I try to be flexible and I try to work with their needs. So while I have colleagues that are short 2 to 3 people, and they have been for a couple years, they're trying to work pre-COVID. This is the way it was. We're government. And the biggest challenge we have in government, but we've always done it that way. We can't embrace that forward motion. We need to be flexible to maintain people. And I have people all the time in the courthouse say, if you ever have an opening, let me know. Again, it's not because they want to work with me. It's because they want the flexibility and they want to be respected. And I think by trying to be flexible with those employees, you're also showing them it's a sign of respect. And that is huge right now, that employees need to feel respected and they need to feel heard. So.
Thanks, Tammy. We're going to now turn our attention then to Lisa from the County Commissioners Association.
Thank you so much. Hi, good morning. I'm Lisa Schaefer. I'm the Executive Director for the County Commissioners Association of Pennsylvania. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization representing all 67 counties in the Commonwealth. So everybody from Philadelphia and Allegheny down to Cameron, Elk, Forest, and some of our very smallest and rural counties. So I have a perspective of COVID and operations from actually running an organization, but also watching our local governments do the same. From an organizational standpoint, I was very fortunate. We actually had a good telework policy in place long before COVID. The difference was that a lot of our staff didn't use it on a regular basis. I had maybe 2 or 3 staff who, had a regular day or 2 out of the office. Most of us used it for things like, hey, I'm coming to the Capitol for this meeting, so instead of going to the office first and then taking the time to drive downtown, I'm just going to telework for a little while and then I'll go to my meeting. So we were set up, thankfully. We had the laptops, we had the infrastructure, we were ready to go. The difference was just people were used to being in the office. And that those first couple of weeks, that being alone, people kind of being isolated by themselves was very different. I remember about 3 weeks in, we decided to do our first all staff Zoom meeting because we said, let's just get together and see each other. And it was such like a wonderful thing at that point. Like, oh, yay, I can see everybody, you're all there. And that novelty, of course, wore off very quickly. But our counties were not obviously all in the same place, either from an infrastructure standpoint, being ready to handle the schedules. How do you handle such a massive workforce when you're also literally serving the public who expects you to be there and be in and out every day? So when I talk about, COVID, Tammy talked about opportunities, and there certainly are. There are also still challenges that we're dealing with to this day. We have employees who are looking for those more flexible and virtual options. But we're also seeing, when you talk about work-life balance, you're seeing the impact of right now economic forces on employee pay. And there are certainly limitations to what government can do in that respect and what that means for employee turnover. Tammy is fortunate she hasn't had any turnover. When you back up and look at the counties more holistically, I can tell you recruitment and retention, especially in some of our service jobs, that one of the biggest things counties do is behavioral health services. So child abuse investigations, mental health services, substance abuse, recruitment and retention have been challenges there even pre-COVID. But now that you're seeing some of these other forces on your employees, it's getting harder and harder. We're actually seeing record vacancies in a lot of our counties in those areas. So this idea of work-life balance really has a higher meaning, I think, for a lot of the work that we do. But I think when we talk about work-life balance, it's not just about the time, it's not just about the flexibility. It certainly is. I know when we went to bring staff back to a hybrid model, we did a staff survey and I heard loud and clear, people did not miss their commutes. I understood that very much. They like being home for get their kids on the bus, to be able to just grab, their meals, to be able to run errands over their lunch and those sorts of things. But for work-life balance, it's not just a timing factor, I think, in a lot of what we do at the county level. One of those things, I think, is stress and enjoyability of your job and your position. I have the, more passion-angered constituency. Not every office sees that, but obviously there's a lot more animosity out there in the world. We've seen a lot of challenges just in the way we deal with one another. That can make some of these jobs that have this very distinct public interface very challenging and make that, is that something I want to enjoy in my idea of work-life balance? And then, of course, we also have to deal with, Tammy, you just mentioned the idea of, having to pull folks along to embracing this idea of flexibility. There are definitely very different philosophical feelings about remote versus in-person work across the board. And that's not good, bad, right, wrong, or otherwise. But I think it's this idea of, where do people expect to see their government? In some cases, I know for a lot of services, I'm like, just let me go online, take care of this quick, and I can just move on. A lot of people expect to see those things online. But then there's a lot of people who expect to come in and see their government working with them in person, have that face-to-face interaction. So how do you balance those employer needs with those employee desires to make the best balance, provide the best services, and really help to recruit and retain your workers? And I think if you can, I want to talk about this first bullet here for a little bit, because not all public service jobs lend themselves to virtual options, and that's really challenging. So, you can't investigate child abuse. You can't take 911 calls in your call center. You can't provide those mental health services or substance abuse services. You can't do your logic and accuracy testing on your election machines remotely. So when we talk about, oh, it's so great to be able to offer this flexibility and this remote work, you've got a significant portion of public staff who literally don't have that ability to do that. And so what I think about when I think about this idea of work-life balance is how do we make in-person work still attractive? We don't want those folks who are, quote unquote, stuck being in person to feel bitter about the fact that somehow now they don't have work-life balance because they aren't able to be remote, they aren't able to be virtual. So it's this idea of how do we talk about public service as public service? There's this, we even have in our organization where we talk about, great, you're able to get the work done, but do you kind of feel that you fit into a higher purpose? Work and life don't have to necessarily be contrary things. You don't just have to come to work and it's a stressful thing you don't want to do. You'd rather be somewhere else. If we can make public service have this higher purpose so that you feel balanced and enjoyable about your time working like you do about your time in your life. I mean, it's all life at the end of the day. So that's one thing I think, we talk about work-life balance at the public level, we really have to expand that idea of it. And think about those jobs that can't be done remotely so that we're not leaving out significant sectors of the workforce. One thing we are still working on in a lot of respects with our state partners is, broadband service is also still lacking in a lot of parts of our state. So even those jobs that can be done remotely, are the staff living in places where they have access to high-speed internet and they're able to engage? I mean, I have certainly commissioners who will tell me, oh, I had to come into the office to join this meeting because at my house, I don't have, broadband service. So that's the public officials themselves. So again, if we want employees to be able to have that flexibility, be able to do their job remotely, I think we're making a lot of good progress and we've got a lot of funding that we're working to try to get out the door. But that's still a challenge to making flexible remote work available to everyone as well. I also talked already about how do we redefine what public service means. I think that's definitely, again, where do we expect to see our government? How do we serve the folks? And then how do we create that sense of higher purpose? So again, there is a lot of opportunity out there, but I also think that, we have to talk about that opportunity as being more than just, can we connect to a computer and do our work? Can we offer people the ability to work from home so that they can have flexible schedules? How do we make that something that's all inclusive for all of our staff so that we can make government service really something that's beneficial and something that folks look forward to coming to do their jobs?
Thank you, Lisa. And now we're going to hear from Michael Greenberg, who's going to talk about building forward.
Okay, how's that? Nobody's ever given me a live mic before. You'll see why. No, I'm Mike Greenberg. I'm associate professor of political science at SHIP, and I'm also half-time in the Career Center. That's what that long title was about. And part of that is because I spent a long time working as a consultant in Harrisburg, 15 years. And a lot of that was IT-based, but with a lot of trade associations and small businesses. But what I'd like to do is to sort of pose some questions and get some feedback from our experts here and in the audience about some of these issues. I mean, clearly, from when I wear my techie hat, the broadband one is the one that immediately jumps out. I mean, it's fairly obvious. And the costs that go with it, where it even is available for some employees that may not be insignificant. And that certainly is an issue. We'll talk some more about the tech. But let me just ask, first of all, thinking about the employee side of the equation, how have their expectations changed about working for government in post-COVID? Are you seeing it? I don't know if you're seeing it in terms of what they ask for or have to have.
I think so, and I think I'm looking at my county. I'm trying to think outside of my office right now. Within my office, I did have a few folks who were hesitant to embrace the work from home because that's not how we used to do things. And again, they've been in the office for 20 years. What are you talking about? And now, can I work from home today? They've embraced it. They've enjoyed it, but had to dig my heels in a little and just make that work. But with some of the other offices too, some of them, pay is becoming an issue. And in Cumberland County, we have a big warehousing component, and some of the jobs, they're starting $20 an hour more, for that. And you start to weigh things, and well, that's a set schedule. And in county, as Lisa had mentioned too, it's around the clock. Some of the things, our sheriff's deputies, that is one office we're having a hard time with right now. Also with the burnout. Over COVID, it did present a lot of challenges on the mental health of some of our employees too, and just dealing with folks and the mental health issues that they were dealing with just in general or because of COVID. So I think right now too, like I said, some of the folks, it's money, but they are looking for flexibility and also that respect. Again, I could go back to, they want to feel they've been heard, and they want to feel that they are a contributing part of the bigger picture of county government.
Do you want to chime in?
If I can just build on that, I think that respect too is, I think employees are now looking for meaning in what they do, because now that we've all seen how remote work works, everybody understands there's a lot more options out there now than just that. You're not just limited by how far you can drive. You could be working in another state for another company. So you've got a lot more opportunities to explore and do something that you might not have been able to do otherwise. So they're looking for that meaning, something that's going to keep them connected. And I think too, some of the things that we talk about pay, the other thing too is that more inclusive and welcoming environment. I think a lot of what we've been seeing in that DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion space is really important to our staff now to understand that am I coming into a place where everyone has an opportunity?
And I do think too, as county leaders, I think it's important to, or government leaders, to reach out to everyone. and just to make them feel welcome and part of the team too. And I'm a people person, so walking through the courthouse, I'll talk to everybody and anybody, but just as a leader to reach out to the folks and make them feel included. Like, how was your day? How are things going? Even just asking about their job, that's huge right now. That means a lot to them. I'm noticing that more and more.
You mentioned, and a little bit a couple of minutes ago, or alluded to the tight job market. I mean, it was funny. We just had our job fair last week, and I talked to, I don't know, 100 people, and everyone says the same thing. This is a weird job market. I mean, I think that is now the technical description. It's unusual, right? To say the least. I'm assuming that has having an effect across the board for all of you, is not just being attracted to, say, working at a warehouse, but just recruiting people in general because they have. Is that what you're seeing?
I think so, seeing it in our county as well. And we have some folks, especially if they have young children, they may have been working full time and paying for daycare. And then over COVID, you're forced to be home with your kids and helping them with schooling and things. And now maybe we can work part-time. Maybe we want to work part-time. So we're seeing a big shift in that. And also the one thing I've noticed in our county is we have a lot of folks that either have a second job or they also have been, coaching different teams, and they're very active in the community. So they just don't come to work and punch the clock. There's more on the outside of life. And some of those, they're double, taking a second look at life and what matters. So maybe instead of having that second part-time job, it's going away, or the full-time job's going away because we're, hey, we're not going to pay for daycare anymore for our kids. We're going to be home. So it's a real reevaluation across the board.
A hiring manager in Dauphin County told me that the applications now, when they get them, many of them say remote work only, that's all they're interested in. And so therefore they're struggling then to fill many of the jobs that they have, especially in the court system where remote work doesn't work. And the sheriff's office is another example where they've really talked about it.
In the sheriff's office, we're really seeing some burnout. I think that's it. People that have been there for a number of years and they're tired. They're tired of the negativity that's out there.
That makes sense. I don't know if you wanted to say anything. Are you seeing a lot of open positions that just aren't being filled? Like you're seeing across the counties?
Absolutely. I know, you look at some of our counties, like I said, especially in those service areas, I know they're really struggling. And some of that's pay scale, some of that's flexibility. I mean, like I said, you look at the human services that counties provide, jobs that can only be done in person, jobs that have to be interacting with people. But in a lot of cases too, there are jobs where you, believe it or not, do compete with the private side. So, your administrative staff, your budget and finance staff, your human resources staff that are also needed out in the private sector. And now there's all these other options out there where, they can maybe go remote, or they can do other things, or they can find, better pay. So I think, there's difference between the jobs that you don't have competition for, that are very specialized, sheriffs, 911 operators, and those sorts of jobs, and then jobs that you're competing with everybody else for. Right. So it's a real mix.
Yeah, I was curious because you see a lot of openings in the workforce. How is it? Has it really changed? It's thinking as an employer what you're looking for and what you're seeking, but I mean, you sort of already addressed this. What perspective address employees looking for? So let me shift over and talk about technology a little bit. Broadband has come up obviously several times, and that certainly is, I think, the big issue across Pennsylvania as we look at the sort of the haves and have-nots. That creates a clear problem. You can't fix the jobs that have to be in person, but the jobs where you have that flexibility, it opens pools of opportunity to people who maybe live in more rural areas and so forth. But if you can't get broadband, then you're sunk. So clearly that's an issue. And then the hurdles of things like once you get to the office side of things, to things like the VPN, building Wi-Fi, having done all that stuff. How do you do it? How can you do it efficiently and make sure it's staffed? You know how to do it. I was at Lisa's office last spring, and I don't know if you want to talk about that. You guys redid your conference room, right?
Yeah, so we have a pretty big meeting space. We can probably hold 100, maybe a few more in there, but we had actually built that pre-COVID.
Right.
Funny, we had a one-story side of our building. We added on in 2014 a whole new two-story side of the building because we were growing and we needed more meeting space. So now here we are with a building that is underutilized in a lot of ways. But one of the things we did when we built that space was we built in overhead microphones. We built in the projectors and the screens. So in a lot of ways, we're able to handle the capability of hybrid meetings. But yeah, so that we're very thankful for that.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I've been in other trade associations over the last year and seen, whole walls of video and things, because they're saying, people don't really want to come to Harrisburg for a meeting, and now that they know that they don't have to, it's going to be harder and harder to sell. Well, why don't you come in for a 2-hour meeting and drive back to Erie? This is clearly not going to change on that side.
Well, that with SACO, that has helped us a lot too, because we're statewide elected officials association, and our attendance has definitely increased. And we can have participation now from Erie County or Venango County instead of making them drive to Harrisburg once a month for a 1 to 2 hour meeting. So that has helped us a lot. And we're trying to do maybe by next year, I think, to do a little more in person to give them some opportunities for that networking. But
yeah, the other piece of the puzzle I keep thinking about is what's missing. When we don't do this, we were talking out in the hallway about the empty office feeling, right? Walking in, knowing that only half the staff is in at a given time, and maybe that just has to change how you do stuff. But what's missing in the equation by not having everybody together? Certainly some things we gained.
So I think what we see is exactly that interaction, that understanding. I think what we found is, within teams, at least in our organization, people kept connected, they stayed together, but that cross-team collaboration, that seeing each other, understanding how they all tie together. And I hadn't really thought about it until I hired a new staff person last fall. And, you think about, a lot of us in the organization, we have a lot of long-time employees have been there since pre-COVID. So we knew each other in person prior to then. But I didn't think about it until I hired a new person in November, and we had a staff retreat. It was an in-person staff retreat in the spring. He said, "Oh my gosh, this was so great. There's so many of my coworkers I've never seen, only ever seen their faces, haven't really talked to outside of just formal meetings." And so that bonding and that building, it is still a thing. It's very hard to recreate those interactions in a virtual space. So, without making them awkward and making them kind of contrived. So I do think in a lot of ways, I think we're doing a good job of connecting, but when you focus on just that, are we getting the work done? You're also missing but are we being creative? Are we thinking together? Are we having ideas that can, as you said, move us forward?
Mm-hmm. Well, and in my staff, we were together in March was the last time the whole staff was together. We were trying to do it about every two months to do something. And this summer, because everybody's taking vacations that they haven't been able to take for 2 years, we didn't quite have the great time to do that. But over the holidays, getting closer to Thanksgiving time and Christmas, we have dates on the book to bring everyone in and try to do some things. But Lisa and I were talking about that, and it's different. Just, okay, here you are together. We haven't been together for a while. We now have to come up with some creative ideas of things to do for some bonding experiences and for some collaboration as well.
I think initially the thing that kept managers from wanting to do remote work was this worry about efficiency and evaluation. At least if you knew that John was in his seat from 9 to 5 and you could periodically look over their shoulder, right? So how are you dealing with that now, right? I mean, clearly you've had a year and a half or 2 years of pretty broad work at home.
Well, I had some criticism from my fellow recorders about that too. It was that they almost like they weren't trusting their employees to be able to work remotely. And I figured you trust first. Okay. And then if you're having problems, then go down that path. But with software now, it's amazing. With our Landex software, I know who's recorded what. I can pull up their name and it'll show the documents that they've recorded. So I have probably the best record I've ever had to prove that they're doing their work. And you can see when someone is logged on, their initials pop up. Oh, they've logged on, they're previewing documents. We can see that. And so you have to give them a little bit of trust too, but the technology is there that if you want to run reports, if you're concerned, and we kind of do kind of a sporadic check, my first deputy and I, just to make sure things are flowing. But at the end of the day, if the work is getting done, then hey, they're doing their job.
Yeah, makes sense.
And I'll say in a lot of ways in the counties, if they were in person all the time, you got used to seeing folks. You said seeing them every day, knowing they were there in the office. And I think changing that mindset to just being in the office doesn't necessarily mean things are getting done. So what does it mean to be productive? What does it mean to be getting your job done? I remember having a conversation early on in the pandemic with my counterparts from across the country, other state associations of counties. And one said, well, how do you know if they're remote that they're getting the work done? And I said, to your point, like, yeah, you might see your staff in person every day, but you don't stand there over their shoulder every single second of every day. You're not there checking on them all the time. So how do you keep tabs on, how would you monitor their performance if they were in person? It's a little bit different, but it's the same kind of thing. What's productivity to you? How do you know the work's getting done? You can tell when things are falling through the cracks.
Absolutely. And I have the gift of gab. So when I walk through the courthouse, I get stopped by many different people. And there are days that I get behind on my work because of those interactions. And that's not always a bad thing. To me, that is relationship building. And to me, it's part of, bigger part of the picture. But at the same time, if we're worried about people working from home, if I would have been able to do some things from home, it would have been done by the end of the day. So, I think it goes both ways, but we have to maybe not be so afraid and give them the opportunity and just monitor, kind of keep an eye on things. And if you feel you're falling behind on your work, or maybe you feel things aren't getting done to the manner they need to be, then you address them and then you change the game plan.
That makes sense. I don't know, Sarah, if you wanted to say anything by way of wrap up or how you wanted to handle
Well,
things.
I think what we'll do is Michael's provided us some questions to get started up here, but now we have an opportunity to hear from those of you who have joined us this morning. Any questions that you might have for members of the panel, for Mike, for Tammy, for Lisa, or for Michael. I would have a question just to ask Tammy or Lisa. How do you handle the use of electronic signatures? Because I know that's been one of the questions about verification when you need a signature for documents. But how do we evolve a policy like that that can help the constituents especially?
That's tough with my office too, because my office, it's kind of funny because we require original ink. However, if you're e-recording a document, when you sign up to e-record through a third-party vendor, you're swearing that this is an original document. So when I get it electronically, it's not original ink. So I don't know technically if it's original or not when things come in. That is something I think that our association's keeping a close eye on too, because I know now with the notaries, that has changed a lot. And I really have to give the Department of State some credit. I helped beta test to their new program that allows us to download notaries within our own county. It's like they give you check paper almost, and you print the notaries instead of a third party printing those and then shipping them to us. That happened just before COVID started. They enacted that. I don't know how we would have sworn in notaries over COVID if that was not working. So if we get Department of Revenue now updated on uploading some things, I'll be a very, very happy camper. I'm told it's going to take a while. I'm going to keep plugging away on that one. But so even through there, they're making that a little more electronic, friendly, and there was legislation passed so we can have these electronic notaries presenting a few little interesting archival challenges for us. How do you, if someone's resigning their commission and they've done some videos, how do we archive those in my office? So that'll be a challenge down the road, but that's something we're still working on. But when you e-record with us now, over 88, 89% of the documents, we already have electronic copies. So we're in a good place.
But just you've hired a third-party vendor to handle that though too.
Right.
And I think that has a cost associated with it. That
Not to us,
not to you,
to the vendor.
to the vendor.
It doesn't cost the county anything.
Interesting.
I know, same thing with our credit cards. We've been taking credit cards now for a couple years, and there's a convenience fee that the filer pays. The county does not pay anything.
Very good. Yes. Senator.
Just how do you deal with the animosity between those who must be present and those who are working from home? I heard it a number of times over the last couple of years. There is that animosity, and I'm just kind of curious how the counties approach that.
I think that's an ongoing challenge, especially because we have counties in various stages of working, using the flexible options. And I think in some cases, there are some counties that have found it easier to, maybe only allow limited telework, remote work, so that they have a lot of folks in, and so that there's that, we're including everyone by keeping them in the office. But then there are those who have more flexibility, and I think that's where they're finding they have to make those more deliberate efforts to find ways to engage staff, whether it's all staff meetings, whether there's opportunities, those sorts of things. But it's also making sure they have the right people in the right seats. If people understand coming in the door, this is the type of job that has to be done in person. And unfortunately, there's not a remote option. So, but it is an ongoing struggle, I think, that we're seeing across the Commonwealth.
But I think to Tammy's comment earlier about the idea that you have to teach people to respect the others that they work with and respect that work is getting done, just because someone's not physically present. I could have an agency that has offices in multiple buildings and I wouldn't see the people. So why is it any different? Those people respect each other. It's just a question of place, and we can work from anywhere around the world now. But I think if you train your employees to respect each other's work and getting the product done, and can say, this person is at the same performance level as you. That I think has to be communicated too, so that they don't think that the people who are working remotely aren't working. I think that that's what people think, that they're getting away with something. So
when we started to do that, after things were starting to normalize after COVID, we actually had a nasty gram sent about my office to the commissioners from a county employee, another one in the recording offices. I know that. And basically it was a jealousy thing. Why do they get to do this? Because I said so, because I made the plans to do that. And again, it has really worked out, and it's made my staff happier. And even now, again, we have taken great pains to make sure everything is as fair as possible. You're working in the office 2 days a week, and then you're working 3 days a week, but then you're working 3 days next week, and you're working 2 days this week. But I think recently too, when we did have an employee who needed to take some time to spend with her mother, and she was able to work remotely, I think it surprised some folks that this was a great opportunity. She was able to get all of her work done. It wasn't maybe that 8 to 4:30, time frame, that it started a little earlier, went a little later with some gaps in the middle, but the work still got done. And I think it really changed some thought processes in my office, like, hey, she's willing to work with us. And then I think because of the situation, they were a little more understanding of the employee, but it's a challenge because everybody needs it to be fair.
But if that employee hadn't worked from home while she was caring for her parents, the other people in the office would have had to pick that work up. And I think that is another way that you can kind of make some of that animosity go away, is if you say they're still carrying their weight of the office. And that's really important too.
And it happened to be a part-time person who gets she's grandfathered in, she's been here a long time, gets very limited vacation and no sick days. So if she had to take the time off, she'd have to use whatever vacation time she had, or she didn't get paid that week. So, and we definitely have to keep those things in mind. And I think they thought, well, this was great. You helped her. I think that's after years.
So I'm wondering if any of you have had some of the planning experience of thinking about like the long-term implications of working from home and questions like workplace injury, workman's comp, and even things like ergonomics, right? Like if we have an employee who is, having a struggle with carpal tunnel or something, we might, provide something that adapts the workplace environment for that need. Are you seeing or thinking about some of those horizon issues that as we do this longer term, we might see more of?
I am doing that. And when we switched everyone to laptops, I made sure they had a cordless mouse because that's a big thing with my office. So we embrace it. They want cordless mice. We're going to do that. We made sure they had extra keyboards because, typing on a laptop keyboard, doing some of our recording is not always great. I personally need an ergonomic keyboard. So we made sure we had that taken care of. But I have basically said, tell me what you need if there's something that you need. But I do see, and it's something I've been thinking of moving forward, are they going to start saying, do I need an office chair? A certain office chair provided by the county? Do I need, certain desks? I'm using my own network at home. So I think there are some issues that the county is definitely going to be having to address, as we move forward. But for now, it's kind of great because this has been a change that they like and that they're embracing because, oh, this is beneficial. And I had an attorney in the other day who was kind of fussing because we just don't have everybody back at the same day. And the one employee said, hey, I can sit at home and record in my bedroom slippers and I'm going to. So yeah, it was one of those things. But yeah, I think there are some challenges, but I personally make sure whatever they need, if there's something that they need to make it more efficient for them, I'll take care of it.
And so the reason that I laughed real quick is because we had an all staff meeting this week and our staff training afterward was about safety at home and at work. And we actually went through that discussion.
And I think that would be something for the legal counsel to answer about how you're going to deal with workers' comp for an injury at home. So
our county does make everyone sign a form saying they know they're responsible for county equipment and that type of thing. They did update that, and you're not to take anything without your supervisor's permission, without signing this form. So it's the beginning.
But thank you. It's a great question because we do have to think the next step, because I think that we've just seen the door being opened to doing some of this remote work. And I really want to say today, thank you to my panel members, Mike, to Tammy, to Lisa, and to Michael. And I look forward to continuing our conversations over lunch. I know we have one more session before that. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, our next presentation is from Mary Jane Kuffner Hirt, Professor Emerita from the Indiana University of Pennsylvania, to discuss her experiences as the Act 47 coordinator for the town of Greenville, focusing on the role and the importance of the exercise of political will by elected and appointed officials. In addition to her academic career, Dr. Hirt has also worked as a city manager and local government administrator. Thank you, Mary Jane, and you please proceed.
After spending 35 years in the classroom, you never sit down. Thank you very much for having me this morning. When the call for proposals went out, I thought this is the time to look back over the last 16 or how you deal with Act 47 makes a big difference. And what I try to do is put together what I call context. As I noted earlier, Greenville functions as a hub. Everybody depends on Greenville. If there is a fire, Greenville's paid fire department, especially during the day, will respond. If there is an accident, Greenville responds. Greenville also polices for the neighboring community and does a lot of mutual aid. So Greenville is looked at as, even though they're distressed, they're still out there and ready to, we can assume that they're going to come help regardless of what else is going on. When we talked about how do we go about remedying the situation in Greenville, we have always talked about viability. It was a new word for them. I want you to be viable, and I want it to be long-term, not just short-term and to get you out of distress, but long-term viability. Also, I want you to be consistent. I don't want you to do something and then turn around and take it away and do something else. We need to be thoughtful in our decision-making and come up with solutions that are going to have some staying power. Sometimes that makes it a little longer in terms of creating a strategy, but I think it has worked in their favor. Something that Fred Rettig taught me, and I'm dating myself, is you have to capacity build. This is something from back in the 70s with the federal government and its grant programs. There had been a succession of turnover managers in Greenville, and it really was detrimental to their capacity to succeed. We were always in a learning mode. About 11 years ago, somebody who was from the community and had previously worked in the private sector and had all the same skill set that you need to be a manager in his private sector job, decided maybe he'd want to take a crack at being manager in Greenville. He had also been on council, so he had familiarity and there was a level of comfort. The manager has been in place for 11 years. And that is probably the biggest factor that I can look at. You don't have to keep redoing something. You can expand. You can challenge because you know somebody is there who has some institutional memory. We also have had the luxury over the last 5 years of building a very strong administrative staff, and they all look like they're going to be staying for a while, which I think is another critical factor, that you can't have a revolving door in any of the key positions, whether it's management or finance. A sound financial management system. There was none when I got there, and we worked very hard to create one. And a little bit later, we'll see that it was a strategic move on DCED's part. They kept funding improvements so that now they have a system that works. And they are now funding their own improvements to it. We can now ask questions and get answers. You have a report, you have a database, you have people who are familiar at a micro level with what goes on day to day, and you can ask a question and expect to get a good answer. We've also spent a lot of time identifying roadblocks, and I have a few that I want to mention later on, that being a local government in Pennsylvania has always been a challenge. There's no way you get away from that. And as a distressed community in Pennsylvania, those challenges can be terrific. Next to the last item there is political will. I've lived through more council members than I can count. Early on, they were very timid and hesitant. Now, because they have seen over time the changes that have occurred, the stability that we've created, they are willing to take that step that says we're going to risk something here because we know at the end of the process, we may have one of those factors that keeps us viable. That is absolutely, absolutely essential. If you have timid political officials, whether they are mayors or council members or whatnot, you're going to have a heck of a lot harder time to deal with it. I have been very fortunate this last half dozen years in particular that people were willing to say, okay, let's try it. We've thought about this for a while, we feel comfortable with making the decision. And they've done it in a cooperative fashion. It's not a tie, almost tie vote. It's been the group saying it's time to do something. Incrementalism, I know, is another term that we use in local government. But this is the only way you can do it in a small community. If you have a very limited staff, you can't expect them to do 100 things at one time and get any of them done well. You pick out something that's important and you move in incremental steps till you get to the end of the process, start the next one. The next slide. And that's what I did for the exit plan. We had hundreds of recommendations when I went there in 2006. And I said, most of them nobody remembers after they close the recovery plan up. Which ones are going to keep you alive and viable? So 3.5 years ago, I said, home rule. We've put it off for it. It was always the first thing on the list and everybody would put it to the side. You need to have home rule or else you're never going to have a change in terms of revenue structure. End of discussion. So, okay, let's see what we can do. So we went through the process to ask the question, elect the people to serve on the study commission, and we ended up with a home rule charter. And people ask me how, what about the home rule charter? No, it's not the best one. I could give you a half an hour on what kinds of changes I would like to see, but it gave them the authority to act in a way that they did not act before. Economic Development Agency. Greenville is pretty much out there by themselves. They have to interact with their regional partners for economic and community development activity. The county has not been a helping hand oftentimes when, and that's kind of unfortunate because I think they could probably be stronger, but we can't just sit there and wait for it to happen. I recommended when the home rule charter was crafted that they had to create an economic development capacity in town that they could get to work. And just recently, they adopted an ordinance to create a redevelopment authority, which I think is, as the year progresses by October, and especially by October 2023, we will have a functioning economic development agency. Workforce limitations, this is one of the Act 47 elements that they have to stay within the parameters that I have set for their personnel costs. That has not been a problem, even though one of the challenges that in the previous panel kind of brings to light is how do you attract and maintain a workforce? Most of the people who work in Greenville are service people. They can't work from home. What we found is that the community becomes a training ground. Bring in a new fresh police officer, train them up for a while, and they go off to another community to make more money. At some moment, we have to figure out what do we do next? And some of the tools that we have now don't really seem to be what we need. I have a recommendation later on. Fire service fee. Greenville has a paid fire department. It's going nowhere because in a referendum several years ago, the community said, yes, we want to keep them. Yes, we want to pay for them. But how are we going to pay for them? We're not sure. And as I tell it, I was driving down the road one day and I said, we're going to have a fire service fee, fire service charge. And I called the manager and I said, this is what we're going to do. And that's what they did this year. After a couple of years of agonizing about it, in January, they imposed a fire service charge. And what it does, it's on everybody. It is not limited in terms of residents. It goes residential, commercial, institutional, everybody pays. And I thought the room was going to be crowded. People were going to complain. Institutions were going to go wild. No, they're paying their bills. Why was it something that looked like it was possible? It's because they had enacted a stormwater utility fee several years before. spread the cost of stormwater management out across the community. They had already instilled in the community the idea that we're all in this together and we need to be responsible together. The stormwater utility fee and the fire service charge have been paid at the same rate. So there's not any internal rebellion. They're coming to pay. The other thing that happened that was very useful is because of the fee that was imposed for fire service, it cut the real estate mill rate by 10. So when people look at their tax bills, in many cases, they're going to see that they're at the advantage because that fee isn't nearly as large as the 10 mills. Capital improvements planning and funding. The old community with lots of needs had great plans, five-year plans over and over and over again. We would approve them, but no money. So one of the elements of getting out of distress was you have to find a steady stream of money. And several years ago, well, back in about 2006, there was a commitment to taking any general fund surplus at the end of the year and putting it into the capital reserve. So there was a little bit of understanding of how you push it forward and use it wisely. Now there is a commitment, and this year it was about 270,000, which is about 10,000 or 10% rather of their general fund budget, which is in tune with national standards. Revenue coming in this year will be put into the capital reserve to help fund the many, many projects that have been identified. And then the last element that they tried to grapple with is that they provide police service to an adjoining community. And the adjoining community has been resistant to paying more because they don't want to go into distress. And I keep saying, but you're being subsidized. These people are distressed. And what you're doing is taking their citizenry and using their goodwill to provide police service to your community. We may lose them as a customer, but I think at the end of the day, somebody has to realize you can't subsidize. You have to pay for the service that's being rendered. Okay, just as a quick, what do we do under home rule? Increase the earned income tax rate, the realty tax, transfer tax rates, and that has worked out pretty well. Collection rates are nice in the sense of you're seeing the growth of the revenue. We also have the luxury of a fairly large non-resident workforce. The hospital, for one, employs a lot of people from Ohio, and so they have to pay the earned income tax in Greenville. And as I mentioned earlier, the real estate tax rate was reduced. Capital improvements, the commitment is going to go forward. I think as long as we can see action, there is money there now. They can go and do things, and people will be able to see the results. Broaden the tax base with the stormwater utility fee and the fire service fee, and so far have not been challenged by anybody about it. As I mentioned earlier, the strategic use of DCED, distressed community grants. I don't know, Andrew, is there a better term for it? It's that special money you get if you're distressed and have a legitimate need. The financial management system has gone from purely administrative, financial accounting, budgeting, and reporting to now they have computerized the police, public works, fire department, code enforcement. So they have a very, very comprehensive system now that they were dealing with paper and pencil in 2006 in most of these places within the organization, and now they can just look ahead to say we need to replace things on a schedule because DCED has given us a good foundation. Government Study Commission received a grant, which was helpful. And I think part of that grant was not used, so it was turned into another support system for a project that was being done. DCED provided funding for a stormwater utility study that's mandated by law, and again became a support to help create that foundation. Community housing and economic development study. This is something that we had talked about over and over and over again. their comprehensive plan was a joint plan done in the early 90s, and there was no appetite for trying to do that. We had implementable planning as a concept develop at about the time they were interested in doing something in terms of housing and economic development. So we kind of took some ideas from implementable planning, hired somebody who actually grew up in Western Pennsylvania, but currently lives in Ohio. And she was able to develop not a plan you put on the shelf, but more a PowerPoint presentation with lots of detail. And they are able to take that and share it with the community or groups within the community to show in a very visible fashion. This is what we are. This is what we want to be. And I think that was money well spent and is continuing. We will see benefit over the next 10 years probably based on that investment. It came at a good time too, because EPA had set aside money to do some brownfield assessment and the work that goes along with that. And Greenville was part of the group of communities that have been affected by that. They're in this phase 2 now, and the planner who did the community housing and economic development study is now working with the EPA study folks. So I think these are all signs of good progress. And when I talked about political will, elected officials, after some fits and starts, are committed to supporting professional management. They not only support it, but they protect it. It used to be people would come to council meetings and scream at the manager and call out names and make all kinds of allegations. Now, council's more likely to say, you have a question, we'll take care of the question, but you don't need to personally attack people, that he's here to help you, not to go to combat with you. They have become more collaborative and cooperative in how they approach Act 47. And it may be because they really want to get rid of me and think I'll be happy if they cooperate with me. They are willing to make the hard decisions, as I noted earlier. And nobody says, we can't do that because we have to go, we're going to have an election. Well, for one thing, in Greenville, not very many people vote. So they don't have the great masses coming out against them. But at the same time, I think that the groups within the community who are active, the elected officials in place and to be elected in the future, all have decided that they're not going to survive if they don't get together and do something that's productive. That it's just going to extend this difficulty, and they really want to move ahead. They have community groups. Parks and Recreation was the area that took the biggest hit, just like any other community. When you have to cut back, you cut back on Parks and Recreation. Community groups have stepped up and done things that you probably wouldn't have had if the town was still doing Parks and Recreation. There are any number of community events. They cooperate with Teal. So I don't have any concern that when they're out of distress, that's going to go away. I think it'll only get better. It'll get stronger. Public education, they really have spent a lot of time to make sure people understand if there's going to be a change. And that may not make it a happy situation, but if they understand why it's being done, I think it makes it at least tolerable. My suggestions. The urban redevelopment law had a population threshold. Greenville went to the Boroughs Association and said, we'd like to have that taken out of the law, please. And they did work, and that change was made. So Greenville on its own can have a redevelopment authority. What they'd like to do is have activity in terms of land banking. Right now, there's no interest in their area. But they have land where they've done demolition and industries have left town. They have opportunity. And what we need to do is get the population threshold out of that law too. And then something that is a little more technical, but I think just as important. Right now, boroughs, which they have to fall back to on the code are not dealt with in terms of the stormwater utility law. Right now, their sanitary authority is responsible for their stormwater utility, which is great so long as there's a sanitary authority under Greenville's jurisdiction. But if they would like to sell that utility, who's going to take stormwater management? So we'd like to see some action taken so that the borough code is made whole. The real estate assessments haven't been done since 1972. I don't need to preach to the choir, but it is a problem. And delinquent property tax collection is uneven at best. Some years the county works well, sometimes some years it doesn't, but it is an issue. Thank you. And I know it's lunchtime and everybody probably wants to go and have lunch. Anybody have any questions? I'm not sure why. I think you have to be careful. When we look at stormwater management, you think about everybody gets rain, everybody uses the storm sewers. They don't function, you end up with flooding and property damage and things of that nature. Fire service is something that Greenville has had the luxury of, paid fire department for probably 40 years, 50 years. And when it takes up $700,000 or $800,000 of your less than $3 million budget, it's a big chunk, and it was unsustainable. Because when you think about institutions, they're getting benefit. I mean, when you think about where's the worst fire going to be, which high rise, which hospital, which dorm, none of them were committed on an annual basis to provide in lieu payments. We got some, but you couldn't count on them. It wasn't enough to, wouldn't buy a police car if you put them all together. So it was presented as, this is something you want to have a response on all the time. And we don't have the luxury of saying, have a fire during daylight hours, or don't do it on the weekends. And it made it more understandable. That when you go back to the stormwater utility fee, it's based on what part of the earth they are responsible for. What do they own? What do they control? And that seems to be a reasonable way to approach it. In 1974, my first job was for a council of governments. The amount of regionalization that's gone on since 1974, I could probably summarize in a few minutes. Every time you talk about regionalization, the response is loss of identity, loss of control, loss of, whatever. And that's probably more predominant in the elected officials and maybe employee sectors. When people want a police or fire response, they don't look at the truck or the car and say, yeah, that's our police department, our fire department. They want a response. And the idea of regionalization, I think, has been talked about, and it's doomed to failure because of past failures. Well, let me finish my answer. Just in the last few weeks, with the trouble of staffing police on a full-time basis in two relatively close communities, the idea is being considered that maybe more than mutual aid, less than regionalization, with the idea that if we can cooperate and make sure there is staffing somewhere in those two communities to respond, that maybe it can grow into regionalization at some other point in time. But I think we all have been very altruistic about regionalization, but at the end of the day, how many studies have been done that have never gone anywhere? This idea of, well, we get along pretty well, we do mutual aid, something happens, this car comes, that car comes. Why can't we do it a little more constructively and say, we have trouble staffing this shift. If you have somebody, can we cooperate and have the response from the other department? We're just in the preliminary phases of thinking about this, but I think it might be a good intermediate step. Thank you. Enjoy your lunch.
All right, folks, our afternoon session picks up at 12:45 back here. And for those of you who are online, there will be a separate link for that in the lobby. And looking forward to some more great sessions. Thanks for your participation so far. Oh, and lunch is in 60 East Wing. Mission Barbecue pretty much goes straight down the hall and around a little bit. Yeah, we will lead you.